I have what you want, and you have what I want, so it's time for us to do a trade. The French and the British, they knew that they could get some beaver pelts in the Minnesota area, bring them back to Europe, and make a lot of money making those top hats, those felt top hats. They also knew that the Ojibwe and the Dakota could get their hands on those beaver pelts. So now they just had to figure out what did the Ojibwe and the Dakota want in return so they could do a trade. We're going to take some time today to look at some of these items that the Ojibwe and the Dakota considered trading for to maybe make their lives a little bit easier. And we'll look at their lives before they had contact with the Europeans, called pre-contact, and we'll look at their lives after their contact with the Europeans with the new items in hand.
I love this little bow. This is the Lakota horse bow. This was the type of bow used to shoot buffalo on the plains. This bow right here is about an 80-pound pull, believe it or not. And what makes it so strong is this buffalo sinew that's on the outside. There's hide glue and layers of buffalo sinew that run all the length of this bow. And this bowstring is actually made from buffalo rawhide. It's twisted. It's called cordage. That's how you make cordage. You twist it up. And on this bow, it's decorated with quill work, porcupine quill work. That predates the beads. Now this bow here is made for shooting 6 feet, 7 feet, 5 yards the most. The way they shot this bow was with a release called an Apache pinch. You put your 2 fingers right here and you put your thumb right there on a knock. The knock is made so it sticks out and you hold it like this. And then you were riding on a horse, right? So you come up along the buffalo and you draw back and it's one quick shot right into the lungs. And you have 5 warriors doing this. These have pretty good penetration. I didn't even pull that bow back all the way.
So what do you think? American Indians, they could make bows of different sizes for different purposes. They could shoot farther or shorter or whatever they wanted. They were quiet. They worked well in the rain. They could make their own. But then they were introduced to the shock and awe, loud boom of the musket. This right here, this is the flintlock, where they could put flint up there. It could create a spark. They put the black powder in the top, and they would shoot that little musket ball. Not incredibly accurate, but fairly easy to use.
The Charleville and Brown Bess, like most firearms of that day, were smooth-bore muskets. It had been known for some time that a rifled barrel could fire a bullet further and more accurately. A rifled barrel has a pattern of twisting grooves which gives the projectile a spin as it leaves the barrel. That spin gives the bullet stability. But rifled barrels were more prone to fouling by the black powder used during that period. Also, for a bullet to take advantage of the rifling, it would need to fit tightly into the barrel. This made loading more difficult. Smoothbore guns like the Brown Bess and Charleville could be reloaded more quickly.
And for that reason, many of the Ojibwe and the Dakota preferred that smoothbore musket, the flintlock, over the rifles. A little bit more versatile. They could put in either the musket ball fairly quickly, or they could put in some smaller BBs like shot to shoot like a little shotgun to go small game hunting as well. Most importantly, to the British and to the French, the Ojibwe and the Dakota, they were willing to trade pelts for guns, pelts for black powder, for musket balls. It was a great trade item. So remember, the French and the British, they really wanted those beaver pelts. But what else could they trade other than muskets to the Ojibwe and the Dakota to get more pelts?
Okay, this rock is glowing red. That water's boiling. That's a good rolling boil there. That's only my second rock.
So you can see the Ojibwe, they could boil water in a birch bark container by putting rocks in there, or they could even soak it in water and put it on some embers. Okay, they could do that. But boy, what a life changer. If they could put maple sap into a brass kettle and put it right over the open flame, so much easier. And yes, they were willing to trade pelts for kettles. Do you see the pattern here? The Ojibwe, the Dakota, they were willing to go get some beaver pelts and trade to the Europeans if they could get something that would make their lives easier. Anything that they couldn't make on their own. Metal, any other material that could make their lives easier for themselves, for their family, they would try to pull off a trade. So what about needing an axe or a hatchet? If you don't have the technology to make something metal, do you know how difficult it is to make an axe out of a rock?
So we're here with this class is the history of technology, and we are making stone axes. Stone axes were one of the first tools ever used by humanity thousands and thousands of years ago. You have your rock and you're trying to shear off different pieces so that you get a pointed edge on the end. So you have to take your other rock and essentially bang it at an angle over and over again.
Well, the last one I was working on for about 3 hours.
It's exhausting and it's hard, I'm gonna be honest. It makes you realize that these people who originally created stone axes thousands of years ago, they spent days and days or weeks making just one axe, and so it's a lot of work.
Ah, the French, they're thinking. So the Ojibwe, the Dakota, they needed to chop, chop, chop going through the woods, or they needed to take down a tree, or they needed to chop in the side of a maple tree to get that sap running, right? Or even in warfare. So they would bring over a hatchet. In French,
haché
means chopped. So that's where we get the word hatchet from. But this right here is just a full-size axe head without the handle. And that's what they would do. They would bring over just the hatchet, the metal part, not the handle, and they would trade this to the Ojibwe, to the Dakota, and then let them put on their own wooden handle because they had all the wood they needed, I suppose. And then they wouldn't have to worry about carrying all that in a canoe if they didn't have to. There you go, a hatchet. Great trade goods. The American Indians wanted this, and the Europeans wanted the pelts in return. Great trade deal. I want those pelts to bring back to Europe and make a lot of money. Big profit, says the French, says the English. Well, I want those beads because it's going to really help decorate our moccasins and our other crafts. Say the Dakota, say the Ojibwe. I want, you want, hey, let's pull off a trade.
That was the most common question people would ask is, how did the Indians make beads? And it was so funny because I'd say, well, the Indians never made beads. They didn't have a bead factory. The Indians were introduced to beads by the traders that came among them. And prior to that time, their work was quill work and paintings on hides. That was their original work. And once the beads were introduced to them, then they just were introduced to a whole new medium, and they just really enjoyed it. And they originally did the beadwork with, and they didn't have needles and thread either. So they would make bones. They would get bone fractures and then put a hole through it, and then they would use sinew and use the sinew and this bone needle, and that's how they would do the beadwork. And then, of course, now they have all modern things like anybody else.
So just like the American Indians would trade for metal products, they would trade for items made out of glass because they didn't have the technology to make metal, but they also didn't have the technology yet to make glass. So people in Europe would figure out how to make just tons and tons of these beads and then ship them across the ocean over through the Great Lakes and get down in there into the Minnesota area and trade those glass beads for the pelts. Again, it was a good trade. The American Indians really wanted those beads, especially of different colors. And then the Europeans wanted to bring those pelts back and sell them for a profit. And then the American Indians, in addition to getting the beads to help decorate their crafts, they would want to create different colors. And they had great recipes by boiling different types of herb roots, tree roots, bark, put them all together. They figured out different ways to get different colors, taking soil to create different colors. They had that. But to get real brilliant red, which they really wanted that red color, they were willing to trade away pelts to get this red vermilion color that many times the traders got out of China or out of India, or there are some places in Spain that they would get these areas that had something called cinnabar, and then they would create this vermilion, this really red, rich color, and they would bring that into the Minnesota area, and they would trade to the Ojibwe and to the Dakota for pelts. Again, it was a great trade deal. So I have what you want, and you have what I want, so let's pull off a trade. That's what the fur trade was for a few hundred years. Now, your job is to try to put yourself in the shoes of the Europeans to think, okay, what did they want out of this deal? Try to remember that, and then change perspectives and put yourself in the moccasins of the American Indians and try to figure out what did they want out of this deal, right? One side wanted just to make their life easier. The other side wanted to get some resources that they could sell back in Europe and make a lot of money, make a big profit. So keep those perspectives in your mind. And tomorrow we'll continue on this conversation about how this business of the fur trade worked. Enjoy your evening. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.